I want you to think about something for a second. You are sitting in front of your laptop right now. Maybe you have got 17 browser tabs open, your LinkedIn profile updated 3 times this week, your resume formatted in 4 different versions, and you have applied to 60 jobs this month and heard back from 2 of them. And somehow it still feels like you are doing it wrong, like there must be some trick you are missing. Now, I want to take you back to a time when none of that existed. No LinkedIn, no resume, no job board, no email, no application portal, no algorithm deciding whether a human being even gets to see your name. And yet, somehow, millions of people fed their families, built careers, learned trades, climbed the ladder, and spent decades doing work that mattered to them. My name is Frances Walker. I am 59 years old. I spent 31 years as a classroom teacher, and I have spent a lot of time thinking about how human beings actually learn things and do things and make things happen. And when I started digging into how people got jobs before all of this, what I found genuinely changed how I think about everything, because what those people were doing was not primitive. It was something we have almost completely forgotten how to do. And I think we are worse off for it. So let me take you there. Let me take you into the actual world of how a person found work in the early 1900s. The first thing you have to understand is that before 1900, there was no such thing as applying for a job. That concept did not exist. You did not fill out a form. You did not submit anything. You showed up. That was the entire system. You physically walked to wherever the work was and you stood there until someone chose you or they did not. Every single morning outside factories across industrial America, crowds of men would gather at the factory gate before dawn. And a foreman, which was basically the floor supervisor who had full authority over hiring and firing, would walk out into that crowd and choose people for the day. He would look at you. He would sometimes ask your name. Sometimes he already knew it. And then he either pointed at you or he did not. That was how you got hired. Historians have documented this practice at steel mills, textile factories, coal operations, and meat packing plants across Pennsylvania, Ohio, Illinois, and beyond. If you were chosen, you worked that day. If you were not, you went home and came back tomorrow. Now, this sounds brutal, and in many ways it was. There was no fairness built into it. Foremen often chose people they recognized, people who had slipped them something on the side, people who were physically the biggest and looked like they could handle the machines. It was biased, it was personal, and it was chaotic. But here's the thing nobody tells you about that system. It also had a kind of power in it that the modern worker never gets to feel. If a foreman treated you badly, you walked across the street and stood at a different factory gate the next morning. There was no blacklist, no 2-week notice, no worried about getting a bad reference on your permanent digital record. Labor was fluid. You took your skills and your body and you went somewhere else. Now, let me tell you about how the better jobs work because it was even more interesting. Word of mouth was the single most powerful job finding tool in human history. And it ran on something that LinkedIn has been trying to replicate ever since, but never quite manages to. It ran on genuine human trust. If you wanted to work at a particular shop, a particular railroad yard, a particular skilled trade, you needed somebody on the inside to speak for you, not just give you a name to drop, but actually put their own reputation on the line for you. A man would walk into a workplace where he knew someone and say, I know this person. I have worked alongside them. They are reliable. They will not cause trouble. They show up. That was your resume. That was your LinkedIn profile. That was your cover letter. It was one sentence from a human being whose judgment was trusted. This system worked because everyone in it understood that your word was worth something real. If you vouched for somebody and that person turned out to be lazy or dishonest or a troublemaker, it reflected directly on you. People did not vouch for strangers. They vouched for people they genuinely knew. And that meant every job referral was backed by something that a keyword optimized resume could never carry. It was backed by an actual relationship with actual stakes. Tradespeople had their own system entirely, and it was one of the most structured and rigorous job pipelines that has ever existed. The apprenticeship system. Going back centuries, but still very much alive and active in the early 1900s, if you wanted to become a plumber, a carpenter, a blacksmith, a mason, a printer, or a machinist, you did not send a letter explaining why you wanted the opportunity. You went and found a master craftsman and you asked to be taken on. If he took you, you worked alongside him, sometimes for years, learning every single aspect of the trade from the ground up. You swept the shop, you handed him tools, you watched, you practiced, you failed, you tried again. And over time, if you were serious and you were capable, you earned the right to do the work independently. By the time you finished an apprenticeship in a respected trade, you did not need to tell anyone you were qualified. Your quality of work announced it. Other tradespeople in your area knew who you were and what you could do. When work opened up, your name came up. The work found you because you had put in the time to become genuinely excellent at something that the market needed. There is a reason tradespeople from that era were able to move from city to city and find work within days of arriving somewhere new. It was because the quality of their work carried a kind of portable reputation that crossed geography. Now, I want to tell you about newspapers, because this is where it starts to get surprisingly modern. American newspapers were carrying job advertisements as far back as the early 1800s. By the early 1900s, the classified ads section of your local paper was the closest thing that existed to an online job board. Employers would place small printed notices, sometimes just 2 or 3 lines, describing what they needed. You would read the paper at the kitchen table in the morning. If you saw something that matched your situation, you went there in person that day, sometimes before breakfast. The people who showed up first, the ones who arrived at the address in the classified ad within hours of the paper hitting the doorstep, were the ones who got hired. Not because they were the most qualified, but because showing up fast and being ready demonstrated something that every employer in that era valued above almost everything else. It showed initiative, it showed hunger, it showed that this person was not waiting for something to come to them, they were going after it. Character letters were another piece of this that have basically disappeared from modern job hunting, and I think we lost something real when they went away. Before the formal resume became standard, which, by the way, did not actually become expected practice until around 1950, according to historians who have tracked this, people looking for certain kinds of work, office positions, domestic service, skilled positions in private businesses, would carry letters written by people who knew them. These were not professional references you listed at the bottom of a form. These were handwritten letters from a minister, a former employer, a family friend of standing in the community, sometimes a doctor or a lawyer. They described your character, your honesty, whether you were punctual, whether you were sober, whether you treated people with respect, whether you could be trusted with money or with responsibility. Employers read those letters carefully because they were reading something that a formal application could never give them. They were reading a person's actual reputation inside an actual community. The person writing the letter was usually known to the employer or known to someone the employer trusted. It was a closed-loop system of human accountability that took years to build and could be destroyed in a single moment by doing something dishonest. Now, there is another piece of this story that almost never gets talked about, and it is the one that surprised me the most when I found it. In the year 1900, a rubber company called B.F. Goodrich did something that changed the entire direction of American working life. They created the first corporate employment department. And I want to be very clear about what the purpose of that department actually was, because it was not what most people assume. It was not created to help workers. It was not created to make hiring fairer. It was created specifically to centralize the tracking of employees and to prevent unionization. By moving hiring away from individual foremen and into a central office, the company could now keep records on every single worker. Who had complained, who had attended labor meetings, who had been seen talking to organizers. The personnel clerk, which is what the job was called, sat in a small office near the factory gate surrounded by filing cabinets and kept what were called employee record cards. On those cards, they noted your production rate, your absences, and your attitude. That word attitude was doing a lot of work in those records. It was essentially a coded way of tracking whether you were compliant or whether you were someone who asked uncomfortable questions. Within a few years of B.F. Goodrich creating that department, companies across the country followed, and the entire balance of power between workers and employers began to shift in a direction it has never fully shifted back from. The foreman no longer had the power to just hire the person standing in front of him. Now there was paperwork. Now there was a process. Now there was a record that followed you. This is the direct ancestor of the HR department. The application form, the background check, the applicant tracking system that scans your resume for keywords before a human ever reads it. None of it was invented to help you. All of it was built to manage you. Now, I am not saying all of this to make you feel hopeless. I am saying it because understanding where something came from is the first step to understanding how to navigate it. And there are things people did in the early 1900s to find work that are still just as powerful today as they were then. Actually more powerful because almost nobody does them anymore. Going directly to the place you want to work and talking to an actual human being instead of clicking apply on a website. Building genuine relationships with people in your field before you need anything from them. Getting so good at something specific that your reputation starts to travel ahead of you. Finding someone who actually knows your work and will genuinely speak for you rather than just checking a box on a reference form. These were the methods that built working class families from nothing in the most economically brutal decades in American history. And they worked because they were built on something real. The internet gave us access to more job listings than any human being could ever read in a lifetime. It also gave us the illusion that quantity of applications was the same thing as a strategy. People in 1905 could not apply to 60 jobs from a couch. They had to make a real decision about where they were going to show up that day and why. And that constraint forced a kind of intentionality that we have almost completely lost. There is something worth recovering in that, not the chaos of the factory gate, not the unfairness of a foreman making decisions on a whim, but the fundamental idea that getting a job has always been and will always be about human beings deciding whether they trust another human being enough to give them their time, their money, and their attention. The resume is a relatively new invention. The algorithm is even newer. The thing underneath both of them, the thing that was there long before either existed, is reputation, built slowly, lost quickly, and absolutely irreplaceable by any technology that has ever been invented. Think about that next time you are formatting your margins.